Welcome back, everybody. Today we are going to move into the second vital organ of the 5 vital organ mini-series, and that is the lungs. I would like to begin by just bringing the lungs into our awareness through our breath. So something just as simple as taking a few deep breaths together, and while taking these breaths, I want you, with whatever knowledge you already have, to think about what's happening. What is happening as we're breathing in oxygen, and what gas exchanges do you know of that's happening inside of our body, and how are we communicating with the natural world around us? So just with whatever knowledge you already have stored in your memory bank, try to think about and visualize that process as we take a few deep breaths. So just in your own time, take a big inhale. Okay, maybe one more. All right, so we are going to end with the same practice, and I want to see how that shifts for you after we learn about the lungs. So the lungs' primary function is to facilitate gas exchange from our external environment to nourish our red blood cells and bring oxygen to all of our tissues in our body. So we have 2 lungs, and they are directly connected to our windpipe or trachea, which is where all of the air comes in, breaks off into all of these little bronchioles, and eventually hits what are called the alveoli. And these are little air sacs, little air balloons that gather in grape-like clusters and are actually what are filling with air as we inhale and breathe in. And then worth mentioning is below our lungs sits our diaphragm. It kind of hugs and holds our lungs, and this is the muscle that allows us to inhale and exhale, and it's a really important muscle to build a relationship with, especially when learning how to regulate your breathing pattern. It's worked a lot when you learn how to sing, or if you're a competitive swimmer, anything that requires a lot of lung strength, you're learning to work with your diaphragm. So it's an important muscle to get to know. So if you remember from our previous lesson on the heart, and if you haven't watched this yet, I encourage you to go back and do so. We can definitely get through this lesson without you having that knowledge, but it's really helpful to connect all the pieces and put it all together by knowing what's happening both in the heart and in the lungs, especially in regards to the blood. So if you remember, we had a blood vessel called the pulmonary artery that was emptying blood from the heart into the lungs to get nourished with oxygen. And so when the blood leaves the heart system and enters into the lungs, the pulmonary artery breaks into all these tiny branch-like blood vessels that eventually lead to those air sacs, the alveoli. Interesting fact, we have, on average, 480 million of these little air bubbles inside of our lungs. So that's a lot of space in our lungs that is taken up by these little air bubbles. And so the blood vessels are going up to these little air sacs, and the red blood cells are dumping carbon dioxide they accumulated throughout the body into the alveoli, and then they are grabbing oxygen molecules to bring back into the heart and oxygenate the tissues of the blood. So that's really as simple as that gas exchange is that's happening there. And then the alveoli then take the carbon dioxide and release it through our exhale. So as we breathe in the oxygen, all of that air is going to fill up those little air balloons and then deliver the oxygen to the red blood cells. And then the red blood cells dump carbon dioxide back into these little air balloons, and then they release and we exhale out the carbon dioxide back to the plant kingdom to be able to nourish them. And so, due to all of this blood and air that is circulating through our lungs at all times, the lungs are actually only made of 10% of actual lung tissue, like solid tissue. The rest is filled with air and blood. So, just to give you a perspective of, like all that is happening inside of the lungs, it's pretty complex. Lungs are also unique because they're innervated by both the autonomic nervous system and the central nervous system, which means that we can breathe without having any cognitive awareness or control of our breath. We get to just breathe without thinking about it, but we also can control our breath. We can bring it into our cognitive awareness and regulate it, which is really amazing. We can't do that with our kidneys. So it's unique that with this organ, we're able to actually control it when we feel like we need to, which arguably is a lot more often than we do in this culture. I think that that's a practice we all need to work on, is really bringing our breath into our cognitive awareness more often and helping regulate it. So I want to move on into the rulership a little bit of the lungs. The lungs are ruled by the astrological sign of Gemini, and Gemini is also known as the twins. It has the twin character. And actually, the word Gemini in Latin literally means twins. And the lungs are a pair organ. There's two of them. They're not identical twins. They look a little bit different from one side to the other. The left has a little indent in it that makes room for the heart. But they're twins. They're working together and they come in a pair. So of course the Gemini sign suits in that way. But also the Gemini personality is someone who is typically quite chatty and very communicative. And the lungs are in constant communication with the plant kingdom and with the natural world around us, with our external environment. We are constantly breathing in little chemical messages from our external environment. And I'm going to go into a little bit more detail about this later, but for now, it's just important to note that the Gemini personality is suiting the lungs because we are actually doing a lot of communication through our lungs. And as far as planets go, the lungs are ruled by Jupiter, which is a gas planet, so it makes sense because we're doing all the gas exchange in our lungs. But Jupiter is also the planet of abundance and expansion. And so I like to think of this as we are breathing in the abundance of Mother Nature every single moment. We're breathing in all this oxygen that she's giving us. And that oxygen is not only creating literal expansion through the air particles in our lungs, expanding our chest, but also it's bringing us all of this nourishment in the form of oxygen to our whole body. And this is a form of expansion as well, is allowing us to grow and allowing us to heal. As far as elements go, of course, the lungs are ruled by air, but again, I want to mention water here because, like I said before, only 10% of the lungs are actually that solid lung tissue. The other 90% are air and blood again is ruled by water, and so there's a lot of water in our lungs. And also, when we think of air, we often think of an environment that is quite dry. And the lungs are the opposite. The lungs are actually one of the dampest organs in our body, similar to the stomach. It is surrounded by very wet mucosal membranes. and it likes to be damp. So I think water plays a bigger role than maybe we give it credit for in the lungs. So like I was talking about before, the chemical messages that we are receiving from plants, I want to talk a little bit more and expand on this concept. So our lungs are truly in constant communication with our external environment, with the trees and the plants around us. Through the exchange of carbon dioxide and oxygen, these gas molecules, there are actual little chemical messages that are carried from our body to the plants and back. And I like to think of this as like little letters that we're writing back and forth to each other to let each other know how our internal environment is, and how we can support each other and relate to each other. And so, interestingly, the leaf of a tree is actually where the gas exchange happens on a tree. So if you look at a leaf of a tree, it has this network of veins that kind of go through the leaf, and it looks almost identical to the patterns of the bronchial network inside of our lungs, and also that blood vessel network that's leading to the alveoli that I talked about. And it just goes to show that we're one and the same. We're mirrors of each other. We are in this constant communication and relating, but we look alike, and we're working in the same way, and they are doing the opposing work. So the biology 101, the leaves are taking our carbon dioxide, they're bringing it in to nourish their cells, and then their byproduct is the oxygen that they're breathing back out for us to take in to nourish us. And so we exist and are able to oxygenate our body because of the plants, and the plants are able to oxygenate or carbon dioxygenate I don't know, but they're able to nourish their cells because of us breathing out the carbon dioxide. So we really do live in a harmony, and I think that, yeah, it's just important to bring that into our awareness more often, and breathe with a tree, like sit with a tree and look at its leaves and be in that communication, be aware of that for a moment and see what kind of messages come through. You might have those chemical messages really come into your cognitive awareness. All right. So I wanted to share a little story, or really just not so much a story as something that I've learned from a practitioner that I worked with for a while in my own health journey. I was working with an osteopath who worked a lot with regulating the breath, with breathing patterns. And she taught me that, well, first of all, she was able to tell if someone lived in the city or if they lived rurally in the country, more immersed in nature, simply by their breathing pattern. So she would lay them out on her table, and she would be able to tell what their living environment looked like, how much time they spent in nature. And she was a core of, I was living in Portland for a while and had just moved back to this area, and my body was all dysregulated and chaotic, and she taught me to come back to breathing with nature and reminded me of my relationship there and helped to re-regulate my breathing pattern, which brought my entire body back into balance. And this is as simple as spending more time in nature. We don't even have to be cognitively aware of it, although it is helpful to be. But the more time that we spend closer to nature and out of the concrete, out of the city and the distractions and interferences that come with that, our breathing pattern begins to mirror the pattern of nature. And that's where it's supposed to be. That is us in balance. And when we live in the distractions of society and city life and even just town life, we that pattern gets dysregulated. And so it's important to take that time to come back to nature, to remember how to breathe, like quite literally. And I just felt like, yeah, that's a really important lesson for all of us. So this wasn't originally a part of my plan, but we are just experiencing so much collective grief uh, in the world, and also in so many of our personal lives, it feels, in this moment. And I want to talk about the lungs and their relationship to grief. So, this comes from a belief in traditional Chinese medicine that the lungs store grief. And it's very common for grief to get stuck and trapped inside of the lungs. So, our lungs are constantly working really hard to receive and to let go. Like, that is the whole function of the lungs when you just simplify it, the receiving and letting go. And when we experience a trauma, particularly loss, it is a lot harder for us to be able to receive and let go. We get stuck in holding on, and this starts to accumulate in our lungs, this pressure of holding on and holding on. And so that energy gets blocked. And when it gets blocked, it can start to result in acute lung illness. A good example is like recurrent bronchitis over years, or the development of asthma, or it could turn into long-term chronic lung disease issues as well, like COPD. So when we are experiencing grief, it's really important that we let go, that we release this emotion and we don't hold on to it. And so, of course, a great way to do this is by using different breathing pattern techniques. I am personally not an expert with breathing techniques, but there are many incredible practitioners out there, or simply YouTube videos, where you can learn some to really be able to let go. And intuitively, something that I have started doing recently when feeling really deep emotional grief is taking a deep breath in, and then on my exhale, just letting out a sound, and that vibration, and kind of just letting out a sound with my exhale is really helping to move out anything that's stuck in there. Another important one is crying. Crying regulates our entire nervous system, and it also regulates our breathing pattern. So when you think about when you want to cry and you're not allowing yourself to, and you feel that pressure that's stuck in your throat and lungs, there's this constriction that happens. And when you feel that feeling, you are holding down grief, you're holding down this emotion, and that can lead to a cascade of problems in our lungs. So it's important when you feel that constriction to find a safe place to let that out and to cry and really feel it. And you will feel afterward how much calmer your body feels and how your breathing pattern is actually more regulated. Another technique is singing. Singing is a really beautiful way to move grief through our body. And if singing doesn't feel comfortable for you, or it's just not your thing, another great one is to let out a big lion-hearted scream. And a great way to do this safely is to just do it into a pillow. Just go for it. No one's gonna hear you if you do it into a pillow. It's a great way to let out, especially that anger that often comes with grief. Or if you have a safe place where you're not going to worry someone and you can just let out a big old scream, that's great too. So I am going to finish up here by talking about some lung nourishment herbs. I want to start with mullein because mullein actually has a special affinity to move grief that is stuck in the lungs. It's an expectorant, which means that it moves things that are stuck in the lungs in general. So, if you've got a lot of mucus stuck in there, it's going to help you cough that up and get that out of there. It's also ideal for hazardous air quality environments. So definitely here in Southern Oregon, smoke season, and in many other places too. It can help kind of clean out all those dirty air particles from your lungs. Or if you work or live in any type of hazardous air environment, or were exposed to something hazardous that you breathed in, it's a great way to kind of move any residue that's stuck in there out. It also tones and moistens those mucous membranes that I talked about that are lining the outside of the lungs. Another one here that I like to mention is usnea. This is a really, really special one. It's a very cooling and drying lung remedy, so it moves dampness that's trapped in the lungs. So although we want our lungs to be damp, it's a great environment to get too damp. And so sometimes adding something that's going to dry things up a little bit can be really supportive. It's also known for its ability to rebalance bacteria that is stuck in the lungs and fights infection. Lomadium is a really potent immune stimulant, so it boosts our immune system, and it works directly on the lungs as well. This one is best taken on like the first onsets of starting to feel sickness in your lungs. So maybe you're starting to feel a little bit of restricted breathing, or you're starting to cough up some mucus. It's a good one to start taking, and just frequent low doses. This one got a lot of attention during COVID because it works really well fighting viruses, which a lot of herbs are antibacterial, but this one is actually antiviral too. So it's a good one, and mostly a lot of lung illnesses start with a virus. So when we think of getting any type like the flu, often that affects our lungs, or COVID was affecting our lungs. So viruses that affect our lungs, that is a really helpful remedy. It also does fight off bacteria and fungus too, because it's changing our internal environment to allow that external foreign problem to not want to live in that environment. So a really, really special plant that I want to mention is a plant that's native to North America and actually is quite abundant here in the mountains of Southern Oregon. It is called Osha, and the root is what we use for medicine. And this was a plant that the Native American tribes in this area really had a high regard for. They thought of it as a protective plant. They also called it bear root, and it was something that they would carry on them or wear for protection, and also something that they would give to elders as an offering to protect the elders. And it protects our lungs, so it balances out stagnant, damp tissue in our lungs, which, like I said before, is a common symptom for lung problems. It's easy for us to get too damp and get stuck in there. It's often when you have a really wet, productive cough where you would want to use Osha root. That's kind of its specific indication. I want to mention, though, that Osha is at risk of being over-harvested in its native lands. So if you want to use this plant, please make sure that whoever you're sourcing it from is either wildcrafting this ethically and making sure not to over-harvest it, or they're cultivating it on their own, because it's a really special plant and we don't want to lose it. We don't want to wipe it from its native environment. So the last one that I would like to mention is actually a mushroom, and most of you probably have heard of it. It's a well-known adaptogen called reishi, and one of reishi's less well-known functions is to help restore the tissues of the lungs. And so it's something you want to use as a tonic, which means that you use the herb for a longer period of time. And it can be really supportive if you have a chronic lung condition and you're needing to keep the lung tissue strong. And also if you have just finished fighting an infection or acute lung illness and you want to strengthen your lung tissue after that. So, for example, if you had bronchitis and you're on the other end, you're able to fight off the infection, but now you just want to really restore your lung tissue. Alrighty, so that is all of the depths of information that I wanted to share with you. And so what I would like to do to end this is to come back to our breath, and with all of that information, I want you to do the same process that we started with and visualize your breathing pattern. And as you're doing this, I want you to feel the commune with the plant kingdom, how we are breathing in their oxygen with all these little chemical messages from them, how that is going into our little air bubble sacs where our blood is grabbing onto it, bringing it back to the heart, pouring it all around our body to nourish us, and then how we are exhaling that carbon dioxide as a byproduct and giving it to all the plants to nourish them. So think of that process as we breathe this time. So in your own time, take an inhale. All right. Thank you for sticking with me through this one. This is one of my favorite organs to dive into because it just really proves to us and what an incredible relationship we have with the world around us and with Mother Nature, and how we truly belong here. Like we look like the plants, we act like the plants, and it's just an important reminder, and our lungs kind of bring us back to that. That we're meant to be here on earth and to be in relationship with the plant kingdom. So if you are interested in learning more about what's going on in your own body and connecting with your own organs deeper, I do offer a health doula service and just meet you wherever you are at in your health journey to support you and help guide you into living a healthier life and bringing your body back into balance. And also, if you feel like this information could benefit anyone in your life, please send it on to them. I want this to be free and accessible, so forward this email or send them any information I have on my social media, or give me their email and I'll send it out to them. I want to spread all this goodness. So thank you for being here, and the next video will be coming out shortly.